at item 4 on today's agenda. Item 2 on today's agenda, the Statement of Acknowledgement. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders and to elders from other communities who may be here today. Item 3, councillors, apologies and requests for leave of absence. Are there any? Just the Mayor? Yep. Okay. Item 4, declaration under acts, regulations, codes or local laws. Audio, video and still image recording of council meetings. Persons are reminded that council's meeting procedure local law prohibits the use of audio, video or still image recording devices unless prior approval has been given by the chairperson or by council. I'll now proceed to the election of a chairperson. I invite nominations, councillors, for the position of chair.
I'd like to nominate
Councillor Kat Bennett. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Libby Hall. Do I call for any others? Yep. Any other nominations? No. Would you accept the nomination, Councillor Bennett? And in the absence of any other nominations, I declare Councillor Bennett elected as chairperson.
Before we get to item 5, we just have a late item. So with the agreement of council, it's proposed to introduce a late item of urgent business, so special meeting, election of mayor and appointments to committees to be numbered in the agenda on item 8.12. So you'll have a recommendation there in front of you. Can I get a mover for that one? Councillor Mildren, seconder. Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildren, any comments? Councillor Watson? Any other comments? Nope. The recommendation is in front of us. All those in favour? And the motion is carried. So moving on to 5, declaration by councillors of any conflicts of interest. I know we've got a few tonight.
Thank you, Chair. Item 8.11 and item 16.4.
Okay, I've got conflicts with 9.3 building report and 16.4 proposed North Leneva playing fields.
I've got a conflict in 8.3. I'd like to nominate Councillor John Watson to be acting chair.
Do I have a seconder for that one? Councillor Mildren. Delegates report, of which we have none, but we'll probably have one next month for when Councillor Speedy is back. 8.1. So the certification of annual financial statements and performance reports. So councillors, you'll have that in front of you. We've got the recommendation on page 7 of that report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Quilty, seconder. Councillor Lowe. Councillor Quilty?
Okay, so here are the annual financial statements and performance report. We have to sign them off tonight. I'm sure that Mike Fraser was very excited to get it, to see if his predictions held up or not. As a council, we yet to have been walked through the variations and the reasons for it over the whole year, so that's still to come. But here they are. We have a surplus, but I believe Danny might be going to ask a question about the size of the surplus. Right.
And I will ask that question, and through you, Acting Chair and Madam CEO, if I can direct the question to Director of Economic Morale, just in regards to the surplus, could you just explain what that is and what that looks like and why that number is the way it is at this present time?
Sure. So whilst it shows an amount of $10 million surplus, there was a number of prepayments that we received in June in relation to the 18-19 year, which has inflated that figure. We received $2.7 million of our FAS financial assistance grants early. We also received a prepayment of the NSRF funding for High Street in the amount of $2 million, which was not budgeted to be received until the 18-19 year. And that figure also includes our capital grant revenue in relation to a lot of our capital projects. So the actual capital projects don't go into the income statement, and that actually inflates what appears to be a surplus, which isn't generally available to be used for any other purpose.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to congratulate all the staff. Trevor, I think, started out on this journey, but Narelle took over and has done a fine job to date. And the time and commitment that the finance team put together to put these figures together and to keep it reporting to us and to the community is so important. So I think congratulations to the team.
Item 8.2, the rating strategy reference membership. The recommendation is there on page 13. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hall, seconded Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall, over to you.
I've got a bit of a croaky voice tonight. So, look, we went through all the interviews for the rating strategy reference group over the last few weeks. We had, I think, 10 candidates that applied, but 2 dropped out and 1 we couldn't get a hold of. But so we've ended up with 7, which I believe is a good number, because sometimes there's a little bit difficulty with everyone being there. So we've got enough numbers to cover when we have meetings. So all in all, I think the candidates were of good quality and look forward to further working with them. Thank you.
Yep, so as Councillor Hall said, we think every candidate that we interviewed was at least suitable, so we recommended all of them for the committee.
Any other comments from councillors?
Yeah, just looking at the community that have volunteered their services to come onto the strategy here for the rating strategy, there's a really high level of skills and knowledge that they're bringing to this rating strategy group, and I understand that it's fairly time committed, so I thank you guys in advance for volunteering this, and it's a broad sector of the community. That's what I like most of all about this strategy group. It's they're from all walks of life and all sorts of skill sets, so I'm looking forward to what they bring.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Any other comments from councillors? The recommendation is there on page 13. All those in favour? And the motion is carried. 8.3, council's oh, you've got yep. Would you like to just read out your conflict of interest, please, Councillor Lowe?
I've got a conflict due to conflicting duties.
Councillors, we've got the recommendation there on page 20. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mildren, Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildren, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This business has been built up really well over a long period of time, and I think it's appropriate that we undertake the process that we're undertaking. It's going to provide a lot of support, a lot of growth opportunity to the gateway, and I think it's only got upside. So I think there's absolutely nothing that we should be doing differently in this approach and this process. The people that have been running these premises have done a marvellous job of developing the area around the gateway and the particular site. So I think we're doing absolutely the right thing in supporting this.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Watson, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just like and acknowledge that Wasm is in the audience tonight, is that this is one of our anchor tenants for Gateway Island. He has produced a quality service that supports all the other services such as HotHouse and everything else on the island. So for our tourism, for our aperture, and you know, it's just a great thing for Albury Wodonga, but particularly for Wodonga on the Causeway.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Any other comments? Councillor Quilty.
Okay. So, as was said, it's clearly a key part of the Gateway Village. It's an institution for Wodonga. What I like more about it is there's a reasonable return to the ratepayers on this asset, and it's being maintained and improved. So I wish there was a bit more of that going on. So it's a win for the community.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Any other comments? Councillor Hall?
Oh, just to add that, look, it is a great business and it's patronaged well within the community on both sides of the border. It is an asset to the gateway, so yeah, I think it's a good move to have them in tenants for many years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. So the recommendation is there on page 20. All those in favour? Motion is carried. We could just bring in Councillor Lowe. Moving on to item 8.4, tender for spray seal program 2018 to 2021. The recommendation is there on page 31. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson, over to you.
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, is that this is done through the Procurement Australia. It's a tender for seal and spray program for the 2018 to 2021 year. And it's just one of those necessary things we need to do in our city.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Quilty? Any other councillors for some comment?
It's good to see it's going to Downer, which is another local, well, it's a national company, but they have a local operation. And it'd be good to see some of these ink cartridges going, the powder out of them going back out onto the roads. Good recycling. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. No other comments? The recommendation is there on page 31. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Item 8.4, the Animal Pound Services Review. Now we've got some additional wording here that hopefully everyone has in front of them. So I'll just read this out for the benefit of the audience. The recommendation is that 1, the review of the Animal Pound Services be noted, 2, the status quo be maintained for the full length of the current contract, and 3, council work and participate with Albury City for the development of a regional pound in line with Partnership Agreement Objectives 3 of the 2 Cities 1 Community Strategy Plan. Do I have a mover for that one? Councillor Mildren, a seconder. Councillor Watson, over to you, Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Chair. Animal pounds are often a source of difficulty for councils to deal with in so many different ways. We've had a recent audit done in relation to the services that we have under the contract process, and it's come back extraordinarily well, with very few things that needed any sort of attention, and those things that did were relatively minor. I think to look at going back into operational pound facilities from our own resources probably would be a big mistake now. So I'm suggesting that what we've got going here and what we can develop into the future in cooperation with Albury City and probably other municipalities around is a far better outcome, and the services and the quality that we can provide is going to just continue to improve with this process. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Over to you, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With this, it's been quite successful. It's been very successful in the sense that we're getting more return home before they go to the pound. So that's really encouraging. That the ranger and we, as a council, doing the common sense thing is to contact the owners if they can be contacted before they're taken to the pound in Albury. But there is less complaints on both sides of cats and dogs the last 12 months, and I think we've had less problems with the service. So it's a good contract, and it seems to be working well.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Any other councillors for comment? Councillor Hall?
Okay, in an ideal world, we shouldn't need an animal pound, but we don't live in one. So council pounds are a necessity. They are costly to provide and run. Having combined pound services that 5 other councils help to contribute to can also provide a better service structure and with the combined resources. The audit of the facilities and management came back with a reasonably positive result overall. Our reclaim rates of 69% are well above the excess of the state average, which was 53%. So, you know, that's a good outcome. But the community can always do better if we become more responsible with our pet ownership. There's probably an argument that there could be a reduction of some of the fees that are charged, but the balance is here. We look, you know, the council ratepayers and the ratepayers were subsidising some of these costs, so there's a strong argument for the subsidies to go and that ownership go back onto the people that don't look after their animals. The audit shows the management was sound and meets required standards for the facility. So all in all, I support recommending the recommendation on the report.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Any other comments? Councillor Lowe?
I'll probably just echo my other councillors. I think they've all covered it off pretty well. I, for one, when I first got on, was a little bit sceptical, but proof is in data, they say, and the data shows that we've reduced costing, increased rehoming rates because of the partnerships with the other municipalities and Albury City. It gives more exposure to the pound on people going there, so our chances of rehoming are higher. We did try to get hold of the New South Wales report, but we're unable to do that. It's one of those anomalies for sitting on the border, and that's why we did the independent review. And as the other guys have said, it's come back really well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Quilty?
All right. So everything's been said already. I do think it's a little bit concerning that the cost of running it has gone up by 17,000, although the report points out there have been cost savings by redeploying staff of maybe $6,000. That's something to watch, the costs on the outsourced service. But I guess that's what option 4 is about. Explore, or option 4 being option 3, exploring other, keeping an open mind to alternatives. I am very pleased with the capital cost saving, and potentially it's more than that in further out years. So on the whole, I am happy with this arrangement.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. I'll just make some comments as well, because this is certainly an issue that lots of community members have spoken to me about. So recapping why this has actually come about, it was for two main reasons: because of animal welfare. So the conditions weren't considered to be good enough at the old facility, and it was going to be extremely expensive to rebuild the pound that would meet the new state government standards. Having a regional pound service has led to financial savings for us through not having to do capital works, and also relates to new fees in place with this contract. So it's gone to more of a user pay system. So whereas previously all ratepayers were subsidising for pet ownership, even if they didn't own an animal, now it's gone to a user pay system. So the people with the animals will be paying for that. But there still does exist payment plans for people who can't afford or are having issues with that. One of the advantages of the new system is the role of the ranger. So they don't have to do pound cleaning or pet care now. So they're freed up and can do things like, actually, before they even take the animal to the pound, they can hopefully return that animal to its owner beforehand. So they're working extra hours. They're now working till 7 p.m. and they're working 6 hours on the weekend. So this definitely helps. Some other advantages in this independent report was that the new pound has better conditions. It has weekend access. Pets suitable for rehoming can now be kept for longer. No overcrowding of pets. Reclaiming rates are now higher than the state average, as Councillor Hall spoke about. All animal welfare agencies have access to temperament-tested animals in the one location, and because they're all in the one location, like Councillor Lowe alluded, hopefully more chance of them getting adopted. So if you look at the data in this report, good news for dogs. So there's been a decrease in the number of dogs that have been picked up and formally put in the pound. Therefore, more dogs are probably being secured at home. The bad news is more for the cats. So there's been an increase in the number of cats that have ended up in the pound. So even our 12-hour cat curfew, there might be some more things that we probably need to look at in that one. Lastly, the number of councils that are running pounds in Victoria is decreasing. Sharing of resources and contracts like this certainly aligns to federal and state priorities, and it's what our community has told us, that they want us to do more work at a regional level. Now all 5 municipalities that use this service are paying the same fees and charges. So I think given these advantages to pets, to pet owners and to ratepayers, I think this is a really good recommendation. So, all those in favour? And the motion is carried. We're up to item 8.6, HotHouse Theatre Update and MOU. We've got the recommendation on page 46. If I could get a mover, Councillor Watson, and a seconder, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson, over to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Everyone's in the grip of finals football and netball and hockey and every other sport that's conducted during the winter, but we also have cultural requirements and cultural demands and requests in our city. HotHouse has been in our community for a long time. I can be corrected on this, but it's one of the last standing regional theatre companies in Australia, and that's pretty unique to have it still in Albury Wodonga. It's something that provides a great service to Albury Wodonga, along with other things as the fruit flies and things like that. So we have 2 of the outstanding production companies in Australia. So I'm more than happy to have the MOU over another 3 years and a $50,000 contribution for both those for the 3 years to keep that culture and that diversity for our community in Albury Wodonga.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Lowe.
Just to add to what Councillor Watson said, it is one of the last standing ones in Australia, and we were informed that actors actually want to come here and act in this theatre because of its uniqueness, its location to the river, and it's also the uniqueness inside the building. So if anyone hasn't been to the HotHouse Theatre, I highly recommend to go. I've seen a very good show last year called Bon Nagila, depends if you're a Bon Nagila or a Bone Gilla. But what was quite unique about that was the first time that show was first staged. I think it was 1977 from memory, but there was some original actors in the same cast as the show of last year. It was quite unique, and it was a very extremely good show. Thank you.
Any other councillors? Councillor Quilty.
All right, $50,000 a year. I'm not really in favour of giving council money to this. Generally, council payments for the arts, including live theatre, is a subsidy from the general ratepayer to the wealthier, better educated elites. On top of that, there's no lease paid for the theatre itself, and council's picking up fairly heavy maintenance costs on the facilities there. I actually get a bit tired of saying no to these things. I like the theatre. This is already in the budget, but at the end of the day, ratepayers shouldn't have to pay these subsidies, so I'm going to be voting against it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Nope. So we've got, actually over to you, back to you, John Watson. Any other closing comments?
Madam Mayor, we spend a lot of money on all sorts of other sporting assets and things like that, and the culture and our precinct. And there's also a tourism aspect to it as well, so more than happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So the recommendation there is in front of you on page 46. All those in favour and those against, the motion is carried. To 8.7, Murray Arts and update of MOU. The recommendation is there on page 53. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lowe, seconder. Councillor Watson. Councillor Lowe.
Our arms get strong by the end of the night, John, I'm sure. Just reflecting on some previous comments Councillor Watson made before, we do support our sporting organisations greatly, and as we should do and continue to do so, as we should do our cultural arts precincts and that as well, because from what I understand, tourism worldwide, the biggest driving factor in every town is actually arts and culture is the biggest driver in the tourism economy. So, so not only do this and the HotHouse Theatre one, it's all about supporting our local artists, our local culture, and many of our community want to contribute to these things in their support. So I'm fully supportive of this MOU as well. It also aligns itself with our Two Cities One community as well, with the support from Albury City and outlining areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This also brings together some of our Indigenous community art as well, and many other things. And I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying this. Bennett's Lane, we're doing we're doing a wall mural there, but community art and regional art is such a strong thing, and the silos. There are actually tours now. You can do a whole lots of different things, and Albury Wodonga shouldn't miss out on those sorts of things, and how that's all brought about is through Murray Arts, and they're a great contributor to our regional arts community.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Any other comments? Councillor Quilty.
All right, I'll keep it brief. It's $20,000 a year. The arguments are the same as before. I'm not in favour of the ratepayers subsidising it. Arts are good, but the general ratepayers shouldn't have to pay for it. That's it.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Any other comments? No, cool. I'll just quickly say it's interesting to note with this one. So in our current MOU, we are paying 20 grand a year. So Murray Arts have actually asked for an increase in that, and that is in line with the Regional Arts New South Wales guidelines that said of a city of our size, we should actually be paying 25 grand a year. But the council officer's recommendation is to actually stick with 20,000. So even though their costs are increasing, we decided to keep it at that 20,000. So that's just a note about the finances. So the recommendation, actually, sorry, over back to you, Councillor Lowe, for close.
The only thing I'll point out is probably when we live somewhere, unless we live in isolation, we generally live in a community. And community being the word. in a community, everyone contributes, I feel, or should contribute. So whether this be through volunteerism, through monetary donation, through contribution to where they want to live and what they want to live in and how that looks, I think it's a really important factor not to take our focus off why we are doing what we do and why we live where we live. I think the better the community pulls together will strengthen each other, and it strengthens the place we live in. So not only will our arts community get stronger, but our sporting facilities will get stronger, but also our social welfare and our mental health will also get better by that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. So the recommendation is there on page 53. All those in favour? All those against? And the motion is carried. We're up to item 8.8, the Wodonga Historical Society. The recommendation is there on page 64. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mildren, seconder. Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildren, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The Historical Society in Wodonga's done an enormous amount of things for this community over a very long period of time, and it's got some extremely well learned and hardworking people that get behind it. It's extraordinary how they keep up what they're doing with so few numbers that are actively involved in doing things. So what we're proposing here is probably a very small contribution in the sense of what these people have put in over the years. Be that as it may, I don't think that concludes the whole story, and fundamentally I support the view and will continue to advocate for procuring a permanent facility for the Historical Society. I'm not 100% sure how that can happen, but I think there's things that we should be exploring even more than just lobbying other levels of government for funding. I think we should be exploring more things to try and resolve this and some other things in our community that have been simmering around for a good number of years, with a lot of people still working hard and probably not seeing a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we can probably step up and do better. But in terms of this, I support this motion on the basis that it's a step in the correct direction, and we should be trying to look after these groups in our community.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Watson.
I like to acknowledge a lot of the Historical Society members that are in the audience tonight, because I think tonight is the starting point where we can, and I like point 2 of the recommendation is where we are going to go out now and lobby for this country, for this city and for the Historical Society to find something permanent for their future, because we've got some great artefacts and it's the way we store that and the way we do it, but we need some outside funding to support that and take that further. So I congratulate the Historical Society for keeping to lobby us to make us do something. I remember at One Australia Day event that was quite pertinently put out there. So I'd like to congratulate you working so hard for our community, keeping our artefacts, finding our artefacts and storing our artefacts. And I realise now that we need to find something permanent, as Councillor Mildren said. So but I fully endorsed point 2 is where we now as a council and as a community start lobbying anywhere and everywhere to get money. And I know the 2 mayors with the 2 cities will help support that argument to get some money, but particularly our council.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Any other comments? Councillor Quilty.
All right. I'm actually going to grit my teeth a little bit and support this. And how and why I passed it that way, that's a good question. I guess I feel this is slightly more responsibility for council than the arts. There will be milestones to be met along the way to keep getting the money, and I'm very hopeful that in 3 years' time we'll seen some changes made, and potentially down the track a permanent, better facility for it.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Any other comments? Councillor Hall?
Yes, I'd like to reiterate what the other councillors have said. I think we're mostly all on board about trying to get a permanent site for the Historical Society. They're a great organisation with dedicated volunteers who do fantastic work to catalogue and preserve our local history, which is so important for not only as residents in now, but in the future. We as a council and a community recognise all the hard work the volunteers do, and if we can assist them in some small way, like this financial and accommodation help, then we should. So I support the recommendations.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Lowe?
I'll just echo nearly all of my fellow councillors' words there and just fully support this. And again, number two, not only about advocating, but actively looking ourselves and helping the Historical Society come up with a solution for the whole city's benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. So just before close, I'll just say a few words. So I'm a big supporter of the Wodonga Historical Society, and I just wanted to make mention that I've been a member for a couple of years, but because I don't hold an office-bearing role, that means that I'm not a conflict of interest, so I'm allowed to vote on this one. So this has been an issue that has been ongoing and it won't be solved overnight. However, I see this as a good opportunity for council to show some more support to the Historical Society and help us preserve and showcase our past. In this recommendation, council does this by increasing the amount we have previously given them by $10,000 a year for the next 3 years. We're able to increase this amount by utilising funds in the Community Impact Grant program. So projects who are successful in this have to meet some criteria, so some KPIs. So because we're utilising this funding stream, we need to be consistent and transparent about where the money is going, so we've got to put some KPIs in. The Wodonga Historical Society Facebook presence is absolutely superb. I don't know any other community groups that have as much engagement and traction on this. This is an absolutely huge achievement. And hopefully through some of this additional funding, maybe as part of the volunteer recruitment strategy, someone could work out a way to try and translate all that online engagement into some volunteering for this group. I know from experience that there is a core group of incredibly hardworking people in this society, but it's high time that other people step up and share that workload. We're in a time of high growth, and it's absolutely critical that we develop in a way that honours and remembers our historical legacy. Junction is a really great example of how developments can do this. In fact, how Junction has honoured a crucial part of our Wodonga history, the railway, is probably a key part of Junction's appeal and ongoing success. So I've heard quite a few councillors who are big fans of the Historical Society, so a small plug here for the very, very low cost of only $20, you too can become a member. So Councillor Mildren, over to you for close.
Thank you, Chair. We learnt this morning that we need to put in place more activities for people that visit our community to undertake and to do, particularly in relation to people who come to visit family and so on. And we have an absolute opportunity and an asset sitting here already with the Historical Society's huge array of artefacts and things that could be exhibited in the appropriate location, which done properly in the right premises could really make a difference and could be one of those things to add to the platform, or planks to add to the platform that we're putting together to deal with the visitor attractions. It's just one example of where we're probably missing the opportunity by not being able to expand and develop what the Historical Society's been aggregating and accruing for quite a number of years, and which they haven't been able to put out there in the manner that they would see fit. So this is only some small way in supporting the progress on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. So the recommendation is there on page 64. All those in favour? The item is carried. 8.9, Wodonga Housing Strategy, a place to call home. We've got the recommendation there on page 73. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lowe, a seconder. Councillor Watson, Councillor Lowe.
Just a quick comment. This is process. We've formulated a housing strategy finally, and we're putting it out for public exhibition to seek feedback on the strategy so far and to see if we need to implement any changes through any recommendations from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think this gives the opportunity for our community to make comment on what our city would look like in housing and what a lot of people say what affordable housing is. So I welcome over the next 6 weeks that a lot of our community do have a look at it and give us some feedback, because you know, it's what we need to hear from you, the community, to take this strategy to final adoption.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Any other comments? Councillor Mildren?
Thank you, Chair. This document's one of the most inadequate strategic plans I've come across and seems to be generated to meet a predetermined outcome, boosting selected housing components rather than being a balanced and comprehensive strategic plan. To me, this document focuses on welfare housing ahead of the full wider range of housing matters that should be comprised in a complete housing strategy. At the very least, it looks at the housing issue from a welfare agenda starting point. This report claims that the large lots and large detached houses make up most of supply and demand in Wodonga. This fails to understand market and popular local definitions and looks at the matter through a particular coloured lens rather than impartially. On the one hand, this report says Wodonga has relative affordability of housing, and then later it says there are affordability issues that may affect competitive advantage. It can't realistically be both ways. A proper housing strategy should address all types of categories of housing and not just the alleged deficiencies and needs which seem to be the fundamental focus of this report. The report makes arbitrary judgments about what the community needs in housing rather than considering the market demands. It takes on an apparent colour of social engineering rather than a true colourless, independent and unbiased strategic plan. The cumulative inference in the strategy is one of a socially engineered intervention directive where the bureaucracy directs the types of housing and their distribution. This strategy seems to add more red tape and cost to housing rather than its espoused objective of creating greater affordability and affordable housing. This strategy does not see retention of housing value through neighbourhood quality, but rather supports mixing all types of housing together. This is a social engineering aspiration that fails market realities. Although this strategy espouses housing choice and diversity, on the one hand it places criteria into the system that controls and limits choice and diversity. It establishes assumptions about individual housing choice and demand based on stage of life or household demographics, with a socially engineered script that implies all people in a particular category or demographic should live in a socially acceptable type of housing suited to that demographic. This is not encouragement of choice and diversity. This strategy is full of contradictions and inconsistencies and will only serve to increase the complexities and red tape in navigating the planning system. People have a right to choose the type of housing they want within their respective means. That choice is ordinarily reflected in the market demand. A housing strategy should provide for that demand range and make it convenient for developers to enter the market to test new ideas and housing products. It's not a strategic planning role of council to dictate, but is to facilitate. This strategy does not facilitate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Any other comments? Councillor Hall?
Okay, I'm not supportive of this housing strategy that we're being asked to endorse tonight for public exhibition. To me, it's just adding more red tape to developers in the housing sector that is already overloaded with state and local government costs and regulations. The strategy focuses very much on housing affordability, but I question the objective of the strategy. I believe by adding more regulative requirements, you would possibly be adding more to the cost of housing and therefore possibly making housing less affordable as an unintended consequence. In the strategy there are many bold statements and word cliches like the city that leaves no one behind, but the strategy wants to introduce design requirements and restrictions that more than often do cost more to implement. How does this address that statement? Tens of thousands of dollars of regulatory costs are loaded onto housing and developers by state and local governments. If we were really serious and wanted to address housing affordability, we would be looking at trying to address these burdens by lobbying our state government and also looking at our own charges. Energy costs are also another area of adding cost burdens onto housing affordability. Bricks and steel are continually rising to the high cost of electricity and transport. How do we address these issues? Many housing estates in Wodonga already have restrictive covenants on them, regulating construction materials, heights, minimum house sizes. Some estates have restrictive building envelopes and building solar orientation requirements. We already have new estates with a variant of allotment sizes, catering for a diverse array of housing options. All new housing requires a 6-star energy rating for permit approvals. This requirement already improves thermal comfort and operational costs. Many of these objectives stated in the housing strategy can be or are addressed within our current planning scheme. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty.
All right. I also have some issues with the strategy. I will be briefer. There's probably too much focus on affordable housing as opposed to housing affordability. We probably do have some issues with affordability at the edges, but I don't think this plan will fix it. I'm not entirely thrilled with the neighbourhood character part. There's too much restriction and red tape involved, and I feel too much local government fiddling around in this area is going to push up costs rather than bring them down.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. So before I go back to Councillor Lowe for close. So on this item tonight, there's no final determination. This is just so the item can go out for community feedback. The purpose of this draft document is to maintain and enhance housing affordability. This document has been backed by a lot of research based on other state priorities and plans, and has been workshopped by stakeholders in the building and development sectors, real estate and community housing sector, which is all referenced on page 70 and 71 of this report. In fact, so much work has actually gone into this document, it's taken about 2 years to get to this table. One of the elements that I really like about this document is its focus on environmentally sustainable design. You would have to be living under a rock at the moment to not hear people struggling with the rising costs of living, and certainly energy bills is one of them. So this draft document identifies a range of cost-effective measures that can be built into subdivisions and individual housing that can reduce costs like energy bills. Building subdivisions and housing that is more adequately designed for our changing environment isn't only just good for the environment, but can lower energy bills. And for some people, that makes the absolute world of difference. So I support this document to go out to the public for more feedback. Back to you, Councillor Lowe.
You probably covered it off well, Councillor Bennett, in the sense that it's a draft document going out for feedback from the community, which has already had influence from community and other stakeholders that you mentioned. I won't rehash them. This is not just about housing affordability or affordable housing. This delves a lot deeper than that. It's about land supply and making sure that we've got the appropriate level of land supply so we can encourage development, so we don't drive our land stock up or house and land packages up, etc. We've also got things like sustainable design, where we can have the most influence at subdivision level. So this could be north-facing blocks, which might add a little bit of cost to the house build. So you might end up paying $10,000 or $15,000 more for the house itself at that time, but you'll save it back just because it's had sustainable design and sustainable outcomes just in energy efficiencies over the next 5 years. So whilst some refer to this as red tape, others will refer to it as good design and good environmental outcomes as well. So I'd like to see what the community brings back as well to the draft strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. So the recommendation is before us on page 73. All those in favour? All those against? So that means that I have to exercise in the role of chair. I've got to do the casting vote. So I will be, do I ask, how do I do? Yep. All right, well, I vote in favour. So I've spoken to Councillor Speedy last week. She attended, I think, all of the consultation sessions that happened with community, so with developers, with builders, and she certainly heard from them that there is a huge need for this document. I really support this document. We're not even making a final determination on this. This is purely just going back out to the community for feedback. So I support something going out to the community for more feedback. So I'll exercise my casting vote and vote in favour of it. So the motion is carried. Yeah. Okay. So all those in favour. So Councillor Watson, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Lowe. All those against. Councillor Quilty, Councillor Hall, Councillor Mildren. Moving to 8.10, Wodonga Planning Scheme Amendment C121, Leneva Baranduda Precinct Structure Plan and Development Contribution Plan. The recommendation is there on page 87. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson, seconder. Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is probably a long time in the coming. When Leneva Valley was first initiated, was probably back in the corporation days as the grand plan of making Albury-Wodonga a regional growth centre. It's growing at its own consistency now, and to bring this amendment into play. And it's been out for public consultation. It's been to the panel, the planning panel's report is back before us. But I'd also like to acknowledge probably Timothy, Kenneth, John and Leon Schultz, who have put all their hard work, time and consulting with the community on many occasions and giving back quality information to all the residents of that valley, so the Leneva Valley. So once again, as I said, it's the corporation days. It's something that's coming to fruition. There's still a long growth period for it, but at least we're heading in the right direction now, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Lowe. Any other councillors would like to speak? Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Chair. I could talk on this all night, probably. What we're deciding here tonight's what we will ask the Minister to establish as law for the prescribed area of Baranduda Leneva. We have a panel recommendation in response to submissions, and it's now time to reach a decision based on the entire amendment, with the panel recommendations being a component. It's likely that you'll hear others say that the panel supports the amendment subject to its recommended changes, and therefore Council should accept that expert's advice. However, it is an inaccurate reflection of the role and position of panel, and more importantly, the role and duty of Council. As the panel clearly states, it has only considered matters raised in submissions, and indeed has principally focused on those submissions that were not reconciled by Council. Council's decision tonight is about adopting or abandoning the amendment in its entirety. My concerns with this amendment go far beyond the matters affecting the individual submitters and far beyond the matters that the panel had a legal position to consider. In terms of comprehensive strategic land use and development planning, this proposal is a grossly incomplete jigsaw puzzle with overcomplicated written legal provisions. The proposal only applies to part of the Leneva Baranduda corridor and has a very convoluted boundary shape which defies all common logic. The monetary contributions for infrastructure land area has limited correlation with the future user population. Effectively, those developing within the plan area will pay for facilities that will be used by and most probably underpin the adjacent community from outside the plan area. It seems to me that the boundary of the plan has been arbitrarily set by one process, followed by another separate process to decide the content of the plan. This defies sound land use planning logic. The boundary of the PSP and DCP area defies logic. It does not reflect a drainage catchment. It does not reflect a topographical catchment. It does not reflect an existing land use and development catchment, and it does not seem to reflect a complete future development land catchment. The boundary seems to reflect a convoluted aggregation of land parcels based on cadastral or lot boundaries which appear to have little common congruence. We've been provided with a lengthy document revisiting the planning history of the Baranduda Leneva area going back many years. I've had various roles and associations with Baranduda Leneva planning since at least 1981 and have accrued some knowledge of what has transpired. Strategic planning started with the former AWDC in the 70s and followed a reasonably consistent approach until circa 2011. Council and the AWDC before it have expended considerable resources bringing capital city consultants to do strategic plans. What doesn't get said in lengthy reams of words describing the history of planning in the Baranduda-Leneva corridor is that a previous strategic plan was set in place in the planning scheme with full legal standing. At least one developer is believed to have made land purchases based on that formal and legal plan. I believe that developer no longer has interest in Wodonga. Circa 2011, Council decided that the earlier plan was not what was desired and effectively removed it from the planning scheme and therefore removed its legal standing and started again. This has been significantly disruptive.
According to local law, we're allowed 3 minutes. The council has gone over that time.
Yep. Yes, I'll just. Okay, Councillor Mildren, so your time is up. Did you want to make any final comment or say something about the point of order?
Madam Mayor, in regards to the point of order, I've taken note and there's been several speakers tonight who haven't been pulled up for exceeding 3 minutes.
Okay, Councillor Mildren, can you please just keep this succinct, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 2 paragraphs to go. This has been a significantly disruptive, both in respect to the landowner's development plans and to the council's processes. This amendment effectively reinvents the wheel. Unnecessarily, this proposal significantly expands the level of red tape involved in land use and development and adds substantial unnecessary complexity. Furthermore, some of the changes proposed have been made after the panel hearing and outside of the public exhibition process. This is entirely unsatisfactory. As I've said previously, this plan sells Wodonga short in so many ways. This planning scheme amendment should be abandoned and the strategic planning reworked to address the entire Baranduda-Leneva corridor, not just the selected land parcels. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Any other comments? Councillor Quilty?
Laptop shut down because it was not touched for a while. All right. I also have significant issues with this plan. I am not a town planner and I also won't go on as long. When I look at the current plan and compare it to the previous plan, I'm left wondering how the boundaries were drawn. I don't know why the plan doesn't incorporate the whole of the Leneva Baranduda Valley. Why are there areas inside that are contributing and areas outside that are not? I have asked questions about how this planning process proceeded, but I have not had satisfactory answers. I was informed the boundaries were drawn in Melbourne, not by Wodonga planning staff, so I just wonder what they were thinking as they drew them. I am not happy to put my name to this planning scheme amendment, so I will be voting no.
Any other comments? Councillor Hall?
I will be short too, but I do have a little bit to say. Look, the first question I thought when I first received the documents for this planning amendment was the shape of the boundary for the inclusion of the PSP and the DCP. Why was it like this and who decided on the boundary? And I did note that I came across a similar comment in one of the submissions earlier on in the piece. They came to the similar conclusions as that. To me, the boundary shape didn't make sense, as I'd seen an older version which looked to cover a greater scope of area within the Baranduda-Leneva precinct. I wondered why this had changed, and I thought the larger area of inclusion better reflect the future needs of the area going forward, especially if the DCP could capture a larger scope of developmental land within its PSP. As it is now, the PSP covers a smaller area with the DCP burdens placed on any developable land inside the present boundaries. This could be seen as unfair by some due to the fact that the DCP would benefit the whole of the Baranduda Leneva precedent, especially the developable land that sits on the boundaries of the current PSP. I know that sounds probably a bit complicated for some out there, but it makes it easier to write it that way rather than the longer term. I believe we should be looking at the broader scope within the Baranduda Leneva area. I therefore feel we need to review the current the current proposed amendment of the planning scheme before we go ahead and support adopting the changes and give the authority to council officers to seek approval from the Minister of Planning under Section 31 of the Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Now, Councillor Lowe? No? Okay. Councillor Watson? Actually, sorry. Before I do close, so you don't want to make a comment? No? Right, okay, yep. I'll just quickly make a comment before I go back to Councillor Watson for close. So this has been an absolutely epic undertaking to get to where we are now. It's been spanning about 10 years. We've had leading state expert planners working on this one. The Leneva Baranduda Precinct Plan, as outlined on page 79, the panel concluded that the amendment strikes the right balance between proposed low-density urban development and biodiversity values. The panel recommended adoption of the amendment inclusive of all the changes based on the document prepared by council and commended council officers for working collaboratively to resolve so many issues before and during the panel hearing. And through you, CEO, in my role as chair, can you please thank all the staff that have been working on this for so many years. Councillor Watson, over to you for close.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I just reiterate that once again, it has been a long time planning for this, but also so many agencies have been involved as well. So it's not just council, but I'm definitely not a town planner, and I acknowledge that the great work that our immediate council staff have done, but also the agencies outside of that who've supported the document and helped the document with the staff. So once again, I commend this to be put forward to the Minister.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So the recommendation is there on page 87. All those in favour? All those against? So it comes back to me for a casting vote yet again. So I will be voting in favour of this document. I know Councillor Speedy was very disappointed not to be here. Like Councillor Watson, she's been involved with this document for many, many years and also said to pass on her big congratulations. She did also note that Wodonga has seen a really high growth rate and that one of the factors of that is surely because of our good planning that we've got in place, so we have to continue this really sound planning. So I will be, again, voting in favour of this one. All those in favour? Councillor Watson, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Lowe. All those against? Councillor Quilty, Councillor Hall, Councillor Mildren. Did I say the motion was carried? The motion is carried. 8.11, so Councillor Mildren, you've got a conflict. If you could just read that one out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My business undertook work in the past for one of the objectives to the planning application.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. So the recommendation... Oh, I'll just wait. So the recommendation 8.11, proposed construction of 2 dwellings at 8 Rundle Street, Wodonga. The recommendation is there on page 95. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. For some years, we worked with Mark Rundle and the development there to bring a new development into our city, a fantastic development into our city. And I commend the staff to not grant a planning permit for this construction on the grounds that I believe we have a fantastic neighbourhood character. And what it could be produced is probably not to the character of what has been currently built. there is a place in our city for what is proposed, but probably just not at this site. And you can always say, well, what's neighbourhood character, and where does the line start, where does the line finish? Well, I just think the work that's been done for a long period of time, taking old commission housing down and putting up this fantastic development for all aspects of our community, I think it would just, be a bit of a pity if something like this went forward. So I commend the recommendation of the officers of the City of Wodonga.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Lowe?
I'll draw back to the housing strategy. In that housing strategy, there's a lot being said about diversity in housing, and that is in both look, size, feel. I think the plan that is proposed for this site, there's no doubt some people will like it and there's some people that won't. I think it's a well-structured, it's an environmentally sound plan. But as Councillor Watson alluded to, neighbourhood character is a big thing that our community reference all the time. But we've got to be mindful of neighbourhood character when we're also promoting infill in our city. So sometimes when we're promoting this infill, it might not necessarily meet the neighbourhood character at the time, but it might meet the neighbourhood character moving forward. This development is adjacent to what is one that's we can consider in its infancy and its early stage, but what it has done is establish the neighbourhood character already. So to place this particular development alongside of that as its gateway is probably up to a judgment call. But the judgment call come back to what our planning approval process is, and anything that's under 300 square metres or two onto a block requires planning approval. And unfortunately, it doesn't meet our planning approval guidelines. So I'm going to have to vote with the staff's recommendation tonight due to the fact that we can't step away from the planning approval process at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Any other? Yep, Councillor Hall.
Just as what Councillor Lowe's just said, the design had gone as a house and not as two joined units, wouldn't have even gone to this process. It would have been adopted. So it would have been permitted. So that says something about it. But anyway, I do not support the recommendations by the officers. The reason for the there are a diverse array of housing and dwellings located in the proposed development area. The pitch of roofs, many in the area are of different degrees. To get a better perspective, I drove around the area where the proposed development is to be located. There were many different styles. It is an older area, but the new area has very high pitched and many a double story or of high development. It could have been said that character would have looked out of place when that went for planning process stage with the density and the height. On one hand, we encourage diversity of housing within developments in our planning scheme, but then we knock them back when they come across to granting a permit on this. I see diversity in housing not unsimilar to this development in many areas of Wodonga, right next to housing stock, similar to this development with the older houses surrounding the newer development on the other side. I don't see, it seems to me there's some inconsistency with council approvals like this. So where does the development end and start, especially in the older housing stock areas of Wodonga? So I therefore will not be supporting the recommendations put up tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Quilty.
All right. So I may have mentioned before, I'm not a town planner. I'm also not an architect. When I look at the plans of this building, I'm a bit underwhelmed. I think flat roofs are not a good idea, and I'm not sold on the raw timber cladding. However, my starting position is that people should be allowed to build on their own land unless there are good reasons against it, strong reasons against it. And to be honest, I think the neighbourhood character objections raised here are a very weak source. If I can be blunt, it looks like someone was scratching around for an excuse to say no, and they didn't find a very good one. There are blocks of units next door, old commission houses around. We want diversity in our housing. Well, this is what diversity looks like. We want more density. This is density. Yeah, so I'm voting against the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. So normally this item would have just been processed at council officer level, and their recommendation would have been to refuse this one. But because it had over 5 objections, it had 11, it's come to us to make a determination. So the design in here is really good. It's really good in terms of environmentally sustainable design, but it has a significant shortfall in terms of relation to neighbourhood character, which is referenced in our planning scheme in several sections, as noted in the report on page 90 and 91. So the bottom line is, the proposed development doesn't meet clause 55 of our planning scheme. I've gone and physically checked this one out. Yes, there is older houses on the opposite side of the road, but this is right on a block where smack bang in the middle of Elmwood and would look so out of place. So in this report, the officer's recommendation are the facts, not opinions on housing design, just the facts, and we need to stick with these facts. Officer Schultz, I've got a question without notice. Just a clarifying question. So the officer's recommendation is to refuse it. So say if councillors decided to go against that, and say we ended up in VCAT. So the officers obviously couldn't support that because they've already made their professional opinion obvious. So would we have to hire, 2 questions here, would we have to then hire lawyers? And then if we had to do that, there would be a cost with that. And then say if we lost, would we then have to pay the cost of the lawyers and the cost of the opposing side too? So that would be a cost to ratepayers. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, we are speculating. I would put it, however, to you that in the event that council were to seek VCAT representation outside of the recommendation, the officer's recommendation that is set out within this report, it is most likely that council will seek services of an external planner. It may also be, to your second point, it may also be a case where the VCAT member awards costs in the event that the council fails in its bid to secure the permit. It could be that the VCAT member awards costs against council. I would not speculate what those costs would be, but I think all up, probably in the order of probably close to 10 or 15, $20,000 perhaps. But it is purely speculative.
Thank you, Officer Schultz. Councillor Watson, over to you for close.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair. I think Councillor Lowe made a very apt point earlier that when you do infill of old stock, it's always difficult. But we've done there is a major development in a large block of old housing stock, which has come to, I believe world standard in looks and in presentation and probably in build. And I think in this particular case, the recommendation, we put processes in place and we put rules and regulations in place, and we're following those, and we're following what our planning and what our officers are doing. So I think it should be put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So the recommendation is there on page 91. All those in favour? All those against? And can I call a division? So all those in favour, Councillor Watson, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Lowe. All those against, Councillor Quilty, Councillor Hall, and the motion is carried. Oh, Councillor Watson, Councillor Mildren. Building, the next one. So that moves us, that was a popular item. Goodbye. We really should have more controversial items so we can have more people in the audience. So that takes us to item 8.12, special meeting, election of the mayor and appointments to committees. Councillors, you've got a recommendation there on page 10, but I'll just read that out for the audience who might not have that. The recommendation is that a special meeting be held on Monday, November the 22nd, 2018 at 9 a.m. for the purpose of conducting the election of the mayor and appointments to committees. So, councillors, the recommendation is there on page 10. Do I have a mover? Oh.
Right. I just seek some clarity here. So we're proposing a separate special meeting as opposed to moving the November meeting by a week.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yes. So did we consider the idea of moving the meeting instead of having another one?
Councillor Quilty and councillors, we did consider moving the meeting as that was an option. It was felt that to move that meeting, which has been publicly advertised and promoted for, it'd be 12 months now, Kevin, about that time, probably was not suitable in terms of making sure that all people had access to that meeting. However, it is permissible that you can call a special meeting to meet the needs of what may be your absence at that normal council meeting. So as officers, we think the special meeting is a much more preferred way of going forward. Oh, the other is there's only if we do go ahead with and move that normal meeting that has been discussed, it's only 2 weeks between meetings, so there is that element as well.
Thank you, CEO. So the recommendation is there in front of us on page 10. Do I have a mover? Councillor Quilty, seconder. Councillor Lowe. Councillor Quilty, any comments?
All right. So just on the off chance that one of us is not available in November for reasons up until the 24th, this will allow that person to vote in the mayoral election. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Lowe. Any other comments from other councillors? Councillor Watson.
Through you, Chair, to Kevin, Officer Scully, if this is not required, we don't need to go through with the meeting. If
That's right. If it's not required, we don't proceed with the meeting.
No, we will proceed with the meeting because we won't be holding the election of the mayor.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Quilty, back to you for any close. Would all those in favour? And the motion is carried. 9.1, the finance report. The recommendation is there on page 108. Do I have a mover for that one? Councillor Quilty, seconder. Councillor Lowe. Councillor Quilty.
All right, I really don't have a lot prepared for this. There's not a lot to see so far into the year. The only thing I'll point out is that it's August and we can already see salary and wages getting out of whack with the budget. We've made this point before, been batted backwards and forwards, that we should be able to, even if we don't know exactly which parts of salary won't be paid, we know that some amounts won't, and there will be a surplus there. There's one there every year, and quite clearly there's going to be one there again this year, and I think it's inaccurate financial reporting to not take that into account, but that's my opinion.
Councillor Lowe. Any other comments from councillors? No, so the recommendation is there in front of us. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Now is this where I'm? No, the next one. Yep. We're up to 9.2, planning report. We've got the recommendation there on 109. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mildren, seconded Councillor Hall. Councillor Mildren. Councillor Hall, any comments? Any other councillors? We've got the recommendation there on page 109. All those in favour? And the motion is carried. So this is where I'm a conflict, so I'll just read out mine and then I'll hand over to Councillor Watson. I'm a conflict on this one, indirect interest by close association. And Councillor Hall.
Yes, I have an indirect conflict. I own property in the same street as property listed in the building report.
Councillors, I bring you to item 9.3, the building report for August 2018. We have the recommendation on page 116. Could I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Lowe.
Number of permits issued. There's been a slight drop off from the month of August to July. It's probably due to the wet weather and not many getting out of the ground, I would say, as an uneducated guess.
Other councillors? Councillor Quilty? Councillor with the shade structure on page 113, I'd gather that's at the Woolworths complex. So this summer, you were able to park there with a bit of coolness this year. So once again, it's great to see a lot of building and construction going on in the city. Councillors, all those in favour? Those against? Carried.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So that brings us to item 9.4, competitive services report. The recommendation is there on page 119. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson.
No comment, Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
No. Any other comments from councillors? Nope. The recommendation is there on page 119. All those in favour? And the motion is carried. 10.1, written record of assemblies of councillors for information only. Notice of motion, which there are none. No petitions, nothing needing the council seal. No urgent business. So that brings us to question time. So I'll hand over to the CEO for that one.
The question from Michael Fraser is, with around 20 to 25% of residential rate assessments being rental properties, has council given any consideration as to how this year's reduction in waste levy can be passed on to community members who live in rental properties and who do not directly pay rates? These members of our community are also doing it tough in the current times with increased energy charges and living costs. Some would argue tougher than most, and would certainly benefit from the reduction in charges. Unless the reduction in waste charges is seen in rental cost reduction, this significant group of our community will see no benefit at all. I'll read out the response, Michael, and then I'll give you a copy before you leave. Thank you for your question about the reduction in council's waste charges and the impact on rental properties. As you would be aware, rates and service charges are a charge against the property. In the case of a leased property, the owner would no doubt determine the rental charge based upon a number of factors, of which rates and charges would be one. The Council's 2018-19 budget includes an effective 0% rate rise from the base rates and charges. This amounts to no additional cost for the average ratepayer. The Council is pleased with this outcome, and I note it will benefit all residents, whether they be property owners or renters. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, CEO. So that moves us to the closure of the meeting to the public. So we've got a recommendation there on page 138, but I'll just read that out because it's a little bit different to the one in the agenda. So that the meeting be closed to members of the public in order to consider matters pursuant to section 89(2) of the Local Government Act 1989, and that the meeting be adjourned for the presentation of awards prior to the consideration of confidential items. Do I have a mover for that one? Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty, any comments? Councillor Hall, any other comments? All those in favour? And the motion is carried. So now we will do a presentation of awards, and then I'll invite everyone Council meeting, so you've got a recommendation there on page 195 that the ordinary meeting of the council be resumed. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson. Seconded, Councillor Mildren. Any comments? No? All those in favour? Motion is carried. Then adopt the in-camera recommendations. The recommendation that the recommendations of the closed meeting of the council be adopted. Do I have a mover? Councillor Watson. Seconded, Councillor Quilty. Any comments? Back to Councillor Watson for close. No. All those in favour? The motion is carried. And I will close the meeting. Thank you, everyone.